Hello, and welcome back to the Ask the Color Expert podcast. Today's special guest is again Jennifer Hernon. We're doing part two of our interview from last week. Last week, we caught up with Jennifer in her personal life, her not being in the salon anymore and what it's been like to move to a different area and all things, client relationships. And we touched on a few things about gray, and I asked Jennifer to come back for part two so that we could dive a little deeper on the quirks of gray hair. So thank you, Jennifer, for returning to share with people your gray hair wisdom. Welcome.
Oh, thank you so much, Elaine. I love talking about gray hair. It's my passion, and thank you for having me here. It's just always so fun to chat with you. Yes, so where should we start?
Maybe start with your own personal story, because when I first met you, you were a pretty fiery redhead. And
Yes.
then since I've known you, you've been, your natural color with some caramel highlights. You've been, lighter and lighter towards blonde. So I've watched you transition, but as a colorist, I think the story of you doing the transition on yourself and learning more about gray hair as a result of having it on your own head, I think would be a great place to start.
Well, let me just say that I miss my pink hair. I do miss it. I've been pink and brown and, like you said, red and copper and all these things. And so going white was really okay. I don't know how white do I look to you? Pretty white?
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you. I wasn't fishing for compliments, but I'll take them now. So, going white was a really big transition for me. And then also I did it because, my over time, I developed some chemical sensitivity. And so I can handle some foils, but my scalp would get really itchy, or I would notice grow out in 3 weeks. And, as a hairstylist, I could put the color on myself, but it's just a lot of work to do it yourself. So it's kind of nice to sit in a chair and be served. But then to sit in a chair and have someone do my hair and shell out a bunch of money and then come home and see that it wasn't done properly, made me just decide, hey, I'm going to go gray. Now I do get foils done to it once in a while, but I struggle with trying to convey the message to a hairdresser how to color hair. If you're going to color my hair, this is how you're going to get the best result. And so that's one area. Okay, coloring was one area, but to also get a hairdresser to go in with a razor and go in with their scissors and really chop it up, because when clients become white, especially clients that have really thick hair like mine, and they're not coloring their hair, they still want movement, they still want texture, they still want the look of some sort of color, even though they're not coloring. And so the way you get texture is to go in and step out of your comfort zone box as a hairdresser and just go in and chop up some hair. Now, I say that and tread lightly at the same time, because if you're going to go in and chop up some hair, you got to know how to do the hair in the first place. Mm-hmm. And, cutting short hair and making it look cool and not old lady can be tricky. And I have found that even though I have a great hairdresser and I really like her, I have to go home and really texture my hair and break it up, because otherwise white hair just doesn't have texture on its own. It wants to be limp. You have to really work at it. And okay, confession time. Sometimes I have to go 3 days of not shampooing just to get enough product built up into my hair. It's not because I'm lazy.
No, this is clean hair for me. And it's just like, it doesn't do anything. I can't wait until it's like 2-3 days dirty
Exactly.
so I can get some oomph.
Exactly. And so, right now we're talking about short hair because that's what I have. But with short hair, if if you give it a lot of texture with the cut, it produces shadows underneath those shorter pieces. And that's what gives it that um, variational look, that
Natural dimension.
contrast
Yeah.
that we're looking for, that offers dimension, that sort of thing. And what I have learned, this is a technique that I learned on my own, and I have a hairdresser do it because I would come home and this is what I would do. I would take my thinning shears and I would not hold them horizontally. Okay. Because what happens when you cut short hair that's gray or any color horizontally, if it's on the very edges, the first, I would say 1 inch, depending on how short the hair is, if it's 1 inch or less, you're okay doing some horizontal cutting. But if you get too deep into that hair and you're cutting horizontal, all those little hairs are the same length, and then the rest of the hair above it is wispy now. And so those hair, a lot of our body comes from the base of the hair, not the ends of the hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're cutting horizontally and you're removing that base, then they have problems. They end up limp, they lose structure in the hair. There's not, what's that word I'm looking for? The hold from the base out.
No support. Yeah, there's no
Support,
support at the
that's
base
the word.
anymore.
Yes, thank you. I had a brain freeze there. So what I like to do is I will point cut with the thinning shears, which I think a lot of stylists do. They'll point cut along the edges, or in my situation, I like to hold my thinning shears so that they are vertical. So they're going up and down. So like, let's just say you have somebody in your chair and that the hair is, I keep going back to short. This will work with longer hair, but you have to be careful. But with short hair, if someone is really full and they're full in the wrong place, but they don't necessarily want to lose the length, you can take your thinning shears and cut vertically. And what that's going to do is remove some of the fullness, but still allow the length. And, I'll come home and I'll do that because I don't want to necessarily change my hair that much, but it's amazing what that technique will do. Just a little bit of that. But, again, white hair is very difficult to color. I think what hairdressers have to understand is that when you're coloring pepper hair, for example, there's pepper and white and colors in between. Pepper still has color in it, like color memory. If it didn't, it would be white. Mm-hmm. So even though there's this dark charcoal gray or this darker pepper gray, that's just the natural color transitioning, but it hasn't fully left the hair yet. This is Jennifer's way of explaining it, okay?
No, that
and
makes sense.
So because of that, you still have to work with warmth. You still have to work with a formula that's going to be believable and make your client happy. But when someone has white hair, you want to sort of add back in what's missing, but you also have to take into mind that white hair fades very quickly. So you want to, it's almost best, this is the way that I did it in my mind, is I would formulate for one level darker than the desired level, because I know in 2 weeks, there's going to be oxidation in the hair. And so there's different factors to think about. If someone is asking for a golden blonde, if they fade in a couple of weeks to a buttery blonde, then that's something that you want to be mindful of when you're putting your formula together. And oftentimes I think white hair can be easier to formulate with because there's missing natural pigment. And as you and I have discussed before, it's not about slapping some NN on somebody's hair. Yeah. Gray hair can look beautiful. What I hate is seeing someone that's a level 4 NN, and they're just dark. And then they have this regrowth of this orangey mess, or they just don't look believable and beautiful. When I was coloring gray hair, oftentimes I would put my base color on, and then I would take that leftover color towards the end of the processing time. I would paint my gloves, and I would massage the ends of the hair with the painted gloves, because I loved the dimension that would give the hair. And you're not leaving it on for very long. Okay, so that leads me to the next thing, the color in the bowl. So I learned from my mentor, Dennis Gebhardt, that when you mix hair color and you have it sitting in the bowl because you're not ready for it, but maybe you're mixing it ahead of time because you think you want to be prepared. Once that color is in the bowl, it's beginning to oxidize immediately.
Yep.
And those little color molecules are really, really tiny. So that's the best time to put it on the hair, is when those molecules are so tiny. Once you get it on the hair, they grow and they get bigger. But when they grow and they get bigger, they also get weaker. So you're not going to get the end result to be a lasting and desirable one if you don't put that color on when those molecules are small. You want them to grow in the hair, not the bowl. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great tip. And you see so many people starting to mix the color when they see the client pulling up in her car. They're
Yes.
trying to get ahead of it. And I always say, if you're going to do that, put the color in the bowl and measure the developer and just keep them separate at least. Don't put them together, because you're not making anything expedite it. You're weakening everything.
Yes, it's called oxidation. So it's just like whatever's happening in the bowl is also what's happening in the hair. And so, if you're going to wait for the color to oxidize in the bowl and you don't get that color on in the first few minutes, then your client is really not getting the best value for the appointment they're paying for. That's just me speaking. But, I like to do everything the correct way. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily correct, but in my mind, when I'm working with chemicals, I take it seriously. And I have white hair. So if you're going to put color on my hair that's been sitting in a bowl for 20 minutes, I'm not going to get the lasting color result I want. The other thing too is, I know you're in a hurry. So you put me, I'm talking as a client now. You put some foils in my hair and you plop me under the dryer. That's just going to swell the hair, because now it has chemical on it and it's swelling. But it's not going to necessarily speed up those little molecules that need to grow into big molecules. All it's doing is forcing something into the hair, but it's not allowed the time to fully develop.
I'm so glad you said that. I see so many people, when there's a question asked in a color forum, there's 15 different responses and 13 of them say, pop her under a dryer, pop her under a dryer. And I'm like, oh my God, who taught people that was a good idea to put a chemical on scalp under heat? I'll never forget Beth Minardi, who was my mentor, teaching us at a class that if you put permanent color on someone's scalp and pop them under a dryer, if they were to urinate during that appointment and the base of the color is blue, you would see the blue come out in their urine. That's pretty freaking scary that we're pushing a chemical.
That's crazy. I don't think I've heard that.
That's terrifying.
By the way, I love Beth Minardi. I mean, she was really an inspiration early on in my career, and she's been around for a long time. She's very smart, and I love her approach to things. She makes them very simple.
Yep. Yeah. I've never been disappointed by any of her classes, because it was always able to be used immediately in the salon. Like I've been to the big stage shows with the thumping music and the fog machines. And that's fun, especially when you're starting out in the industry. You're
Yeah.
just so amazed at like what hair can do, from a entertainment standpoint. But true, actual education that I could pack up my little notebook, go home and use the next day in the salon always came from Beth and her smaller,
Yeah.
more intimate events.
Yes. And that's
for sure.
everything, isn't it? Because I'm with you. You go to a hair show and it's like seeing a guy in a cowboy hat with long stringy hair. Am I really going to learn something of value from him?
Right.
So that too, finding the right kind of education is huge. Finding and okay, so after I was in the industry for like 20 years, I knew how to start something and finish something, but I didn't know the why in the middle.
Yep.
And after I got educated, I understood the science of things. I was of the mindset early on that this is the color line I use because this color works. And I was of the mindset of this is a better color line than those other color lines because it's the one that works. And that's not the case. If you buy a mixed color line, it's kind of your safety net, because what I say by mixed is a
Pre-blended, yeah.
pre-blended line. You buy a pre-blended line, it's kind of your safety net. So you're not really learning how to mix color. And, I prefer a blended line, but I also understand how to mix color. And once you learn how to mix color, once you learn how to test it out, swatch it out on fabric, you can work with any color line. And you also have to understand developers, because again, as you and I know, the power is not in developer. Developer is very, very acidic. So acidic that you could burn your finger if you left it in there long enough. Do you remember that picture of the meat?
The meat, I'll never forget that picture.
Where we put different levels of developer on meat, and how blown away the 40 volume was. I admit, I had so my friend that lives here, I've done her hair, like my entire career. I still do her hair now. And I remember, and she has very fine hair, and this is before I learned about hair textures. And so I would foil her hair with like 30 and 40 volume, and always got it nice and bright and light. She has tons of gold in her hair. And I would get it nice and bright and light because the 40 volume worked fast, but I didn't understand what was happening to the hair when you were using something to act quickly. Okay. So I would do her hair, and a couple of weeks later, she'd look like she'd put her finger in a light socket. It was so fried because, again, she had very fine hair. And I was like, I can't let her look like that. We got to do stuff to recondition it. Okay. Well, first, once you fry the hair, ain't no unfrying it.
No unfrying.
You can't redo the damage you've done. And as Dennis would say, it was like he described it as sandblasting a car. It was like you can take a freshly painted car and you blast sand on it, and now it has holes, it's missing bits of paint. Well, that's what a 40 volume can do on the wrong texture of hair.
And Beth says you can't take a well done steak and then make it medium rare. Like once it's cooked,
Exactly.
It's cooked. Yeah.
Exactly. And let me also say that when you put protein on hair, now maybe products have changed because I, haven't been working right now, and I know there's new products coming out. I know there's, reconstructors and things out there. But once protein is removed from the hair, there's nothing you can really do that replaces it and makes it like freshly grown out proteinized hair. And so anyway, back to my story of my friend with the fried hair. So once I learned what I was doing, I moved to a lower volume of developer, and I would get the same result. It just took a little more time. And that's the thing that we have to understand as hairdressers, I think, because every hairdresser, they're trying to make the maximum use of their time and get in all these people and all of this. But the client's hair is being compromised.
Absolutely. And if the client knew that longer timing was going to give them a healthier result, I think they would take more time to sit there and
Yes.
appreciate that downtime. Bring something with them, bring work, or
Yes.
multitask, rather than use the higher developer and then leave with fried hair that they're trying to give a drink to every single time they shampoo.
They could let someone process while they get another client started. You can double book yourself, and as long as you are educating your client on how you work, if they want in and they don't mind being shuffled, then that's a good thing, because it will allow that processing time to happen. And with regards to coloring someone's hair, after that 40 minutes or whatever the processing time that it takes, sometimes it takes more than 40 minutes and sometimes maybe less than 40 minutes. Again, it's all about hair texture. What people need to do is just not believe the hair is done. You need to check it. And do they know how to check the hair? Well, if you don't, I'll tell you. What I do is I take the end of a color wand, and I will take that wand and just scrape the regrowth, the first ½ inch of regrowth. And then I'll kind of push that up and compare it and just see, do I see any under processed hair? Because another thing too is, if you don't get that application of color nice and even and fine little sections, it'll look half processed. You know what I mean? Like when the gray is kind of poking through and it's stained, but it's not necessarily covered.
Yeah.
And that's the tricky thing too, is just
I think that's the number one issue that people don't realize they're doing. Is I've seen some people apply a retouch, and my guest presenter at the retreat and myself, we both take 30 minutes to apply a single process color. And people look at me when I say that, like, what, did you just get out of beauty school? And I'm like, no, but you will not find a single gray hair on any one of my clients leaving my chair. I have never had a gray covering issue ever. I don't buy into this pre-softening BS that people say, put developer straight on there, do this, turn around 3 times and do the hokey pokey. I get every gray covered because of my tedious application and cross-checking and tapping and the friction of the brush and all of those things that I don't have an issue whatsoever. But people won't take that advice, and they just keep switching color lines and blaming it on the color. All color is designed to cover gray hair.
And let's just talk about this pre-softening business. Okay. I admit there was a time where I believed that that developer would pre-soften. Well, you know what I did? You know what I learned? You buy yourself some pH strips. You
just did that at the retreat. We tested with the pH strips. Yep.
You test the hair color before it comes out of the tube. And then you test the developer and you look. Now, which one is going to be more acidic? See, it's alkalinity that changes hair color. Shoot, you could probably color someone's hair with the tube of color without the developer. Problem is, you'd probably burn their scalp
right
to the roof and back. But you can take that hair color and you can use it to pre-soften a stubborn area. Say you're working on somebody who behind the ear, as we know, can be a very tricky area. Behind the ear, maybe they're just extra coarse in texture. Now, earlier in the first part of our conversation in part one, we talked about the texture of hair. Now, I remember I had this Asian client sitting in my chair, and is that politically correct? Can I call her Asian?
No,
Because
technically no, but I still do. You're
because
supposed
this
to say level 1, 2 client, you know.
okay, well, so she had this crazy wiry hair. Oh my gosh. I remember when the first time she came and sat in my chair and I saw her hair and I just thought, this is going to be a challenge. Well, I figured it out. You know, I would take her hair because normally textured hair can be easy to cover, but not all textured hair. So this is like this dichotomy, right? Because you've got this hair that's really wiry, that one's easy to color, and you got this one that's really wiry, and that one's not easy to color. And how do you know the difference? Well, what do they look like when they're sitting in your chair when they've come back? One of the things that I have preached for so long is when I get a new client sitting in my chair, I don't promise the moon and stars on the first visit. I always say, you know, let's plan for 3 visits. The first visit, I'm trying to figure it out. The second visit, I want to see what it looks like when you return. And the third visit, I'm tweaking what I did on the first visit. Now, this can be color, this can be haircut, but you know, I've always believed in that because number one, you're setting a plan with your client. So planning with a client is huge because they might come to you for the first time and not believe in you because you're trying to figure them out. But because you didn't explain how you operate, they think you're not good.
I love that.
Right? So when they know that it can take up to 3 visits, they know after the first visit, this isn't perfect, but she told me it's going to be a process. So I'm coming back for my next visit. Okay, third visit, they come back. You got it. Yay. All the bells and whistles. You know, we're happy. We're dancing around the chair. Now, by the 4th visit, how many months has that been? That's been at least 6 months. You've got a client, right? They've come to you 4 times. They believe in you because you laid out a plan. You're working on their hair. That is so important to building trust. And by having a plan, by educating your client, you're building that trust. I think I just went down another rabbit trail because we were talking about gray.
That's okay. So back to your transition, what were some of the things that you wish that the hairstylist whose chair you landed in had known that you didn't have to school them through the entire process?
Okay. I love this hairdresser that I've been going to, but I kept trying to have her create more contrast, and she kept telling me that she's a natural foilist and she's not comfortable giving me the chunky, the streaky, you know. And these younger hairdressers, they're so afraid of being chunky and streaky because you're not supposed to do that in balayage. And, you know, as we know right now, hair painting is like the everything. It's everything. Okay. But when you're young and you're 20 something and you have this new client who's going through life with you, then 30 years later, you're balayaging color treated hair, but hey, you're not getting the results you thought you wanted when you want to balayage that color treated hair. So what is it that you're doing wrong? Why am I fading? Why am I not getting the coverage I want? You know, I think that's the biggest thing. And so this client, you know, she says she's not a natural, you know, that she only does natural color and she's not comfortable doing chunky, streaky, whatever. Well, when you have really thick hair, if you do a natural foil on really thick, fine hair or really thick textured hair that's gray and white, it's going to totally disappear because it's naturally fine. You know, on someone that has pigmented hair, naturally pigmented hair, and you do a really natural foil, you can see it. You can see that natural foil, and it's soft and believable and beautiful. But when someone turns white and they have massive amounts of white hair or even fine hair, you need to communicate really well what is the expectation of that client, because it might take you out of your comfort box to do what they want you to do. And if you say, I'm not like that, I only do this, then I would say, well, how important is it to have that client? Or you can look at it as a learning experience, because everything you learn as a young stylist on white and gray hair is going to be your bread and butter down the road. If you can master it at a young age and not slap on 6NN or double pigmented color or whatever, you are going to be doing very, very well. Because I don't know about you, I'm sure you did very well, but you know, those clients, they go through life with you, and you need to master all kinds of hair, not just hair painting. That's been my biggest complaint. And interestingly enough, I live right near Coeur d'Alene, which is a resort town. And so I went to a stylist there because I saw one of her clients and commented, hey, you know, where do you get your hair done? So I went to this lady and I told her my problem. And I'm like, okay, I want contrast and I need it to be shorter. Oh my gosh. When she was done, I didn't even recognize myself. So I have to say that was like a little too much. But she had the skill and the confidence just to go in there and do it. And, you know, when you have short hair, you don't really have to worry too much because you're going to cut it anyway.
Right.
But that's the biggest challenge, I think, is, you know, if I want to have a low light and I've got white hair, then anything below a level 7 for a low light is probably good, because really a level 7 is considered blonde. And if you're foiling with a level 7 that's blonde, it's going to fade. It's like putting a level 8 on somebody's hair. And so it's important to, you know, communicate with your client that, hey, is it okay if we try this? You might feel a little bit dark, but I want to see how it fades. Or you can foil with, you know, say a 6 and a 5 and see how they both work. Because really it's more like foiling with a 6 and a 7. Unless you're using say a deposit only color. Now you know, there was a learning curve for me early on when I started learning about the chemistry of color. And let me tell you, there's a lot I've forgotten and there's a lot I remember. And I feel like I'm still walking the journey, like I haven't arrived yet. But I thought it was really amazing to learn about demi-permanent alkaline color. Demi-permanent, and I always get the two mixed up, semi-permanent, demi-permanent. It has to do with how alkaline that color is. It's still considered permanent color, but it's more of a depositing color. So it doesn't have undertone lift necessarily. Well, I guess it depends on what you're using. Right. But you know, the color line I was using, you had the ability to make it translucent by adding more developer to it. And notice I'm not saying a brand. Or you could mix it equal parts depending on how you wanted to manipulate that color. You know, you really want to understand how depositing hair color works. And so I really found that I loved depositing hair color, but I loved a color that was more opaque. Now, what that means is that it had a richness, it had a depth. It wasn't as reflective or translucent. And the reason why I like that richness and depth is because on white hair and gray hair, if you have something all shiny and happy, there's so much reflection, they're not going to see the depth as much that they want to see. You can do it with a shiny and translucent color. You can have that. But honestly, with my hair, and I just am using myself as an example all the time, is because white hair and gray hair, by the time you put product on it, it has a lot of shine. And, you know, you can get, and that's another thing, is learning what kind of products to use in gray hair and transitioning hair. But I just found through my own experience and working on my clients that I loved using lowlights that were more matte in appearance. I wanted the reflection to be on the other part of the formula that I was putting into their hair. Now I'm referring to when I'm foiling it. If I am covering hair, or, you know, adding hair color, a lot of times I would use a depositing color because it brought out less contributing pigment than if I was using, just say, a regular alkaline hair color that's pre-blended. If the hair has gray left in it and they want to go to a color that's, say, let's just say level 5, just for ease of visual in the head. Oftentimes I would just deposit the color and I would use the least invasive approach that I could. And so I would deposit color because, and when I say deposit color, I'm talking about using a color, either a permanent color with a 10 volume, and I'm working it as a deposit, or I'm talking about a demi-permanent color that I'm using with their with the developer that goes with that color line. I would use those as depositing colors because many times hair will fade warm when you're using permanent color on that gray hair. Whew, that was a lot to say. Did that make sense?
That makes sense. But that's my next question on your lowlights. Do you have them apply something gunmetal and steely and in the gray family, or are you having them deposit something just in a neutral brown? Okay.
Neutral, because gunmetal, that don't look so good on gray hair, in my opinion, because what happens is, you know, you're already feeling kind of washed out.
Right.
So if you're adding a gunmetal silver, that can look almost blue in someone's hair. You know, and again, I think you have to understand, what does that neutral look like? That's another reason why I would swatch it out on fabric and look at it, is mix it up with its developer, say 20 volume. No, okay, let me back up, because we haven't really talked about this, but when you mix hair color with 20 volume, take that formula you just mixed, or let's go back. Let's take a neutral, mix it with 20 volume, swatch it out on some white 100% cotton, and watch it develop. Eat some popcorn, have fun, and watch it. And what color do you see it developing to? Are you seeing mud? Are you seeing some gold? Are you seeing green? What are you seeing? Because if you see something nice and balanced that makes you feel good, makes you feel all those good vibes inside, that's what I would use on that white hair. But if I see something that's blue and I'm depositing color and I'm seeing this blue pigment come out, I would have a conversation with my client about that. I would say, you know, do you wear a lot of dark gray? Do you wear a lot of black? I mean, you know, really find out their personality, because maybe that blue black color, or that level 5 or that level 4 or whatever, maybe that's what they want. And that has to be a decision that's made between the client and the hairdresser. But for myself, if I'm going to tell somebody, what to deposit, I would say start with a neutral, but really understand your color line that you're working with, because I mean, if there's pigment left in the hair, then yes, if you see some green and it's a level 4 or a 5 that you're putting on that hair, or a green blue, then great, use that, because that's going to, even though there's alkalinity in that tube color and you're using the lowest volumes, you're still going to get some contribution of warmth. But if you're depositing and there's not hardly any natural pigment in the hair and you're depositing, then I would stick with something more neutral, because what happens is the hair gets porous. Even though it fades, if that person has long hair and you're using something really cool, you'll end up with this really muddy, unnatural looking hair that then you're going to have to reformulate for. And that's a whole nother topic, because when we get clients in our chair, it's a really good thing to mix up your formula once in a while. It gives them something slightly different. They don't have to go home and have a freak out attack because their hair is totally different now. But if you make these twitches of change in their formula and you talk to them about it, say, hey, let's just do this today. Let's just change up your formula just a little bit. That allows you to experiment. It gives them something different. Let's just say you're doing a neutral all the time, right? And they come back in, they have longer hair, and you've deposited that neutral on the whole head of hair, meaning that you did their regrowth, and then maybe you use something with a liquid color that's neutral on the ends. When they come back in, you can switch to more of a golden tone. So you can still put the neutral on the base, but now you can, that hair now that has faded, in order to avoid the muddy results, you can add a little bit of gold into your formula to compensate for that difference.
I'm glad you brought up gold, because everybody is so fearful of gold and staying away from gold, and all these ashy cool colors have been in fashion for so long. But I feel like the color companies have overcompensated so much more on the blue side, because you and I, back in the 80s when we started doing hair, it was hard to find a strong blue or a green based color. Everything was leaning more warm. But now it's like too far to the other extreme, and people are starting to finally realize that they have to add that little bit of gold into their glazes and toners to keep it from going flat and muddy, because blue will always be the bully. It's always going to take over any mixture of color. And I think that's something that people forget. I think the other biggest disconnect is people figuring out the percentage of gray. I have this swatch that I just brought back from the retreat, and this is 50% gray, 50% level 5. So when I look at someone from across the room, I can say 50% versus 25% versus 75, because I've done this for 35 years. I can do it in my sleep. But I think that when people are learning color, they're not paying enough attention to the percentage of gray, and they're formulating more to the natural than to the percentage of gray. And they're either getting crap gray coverage because they ignored the gray, or they're getting super warm and brassy results because they didn't realize how small the amount of gray was, and they didn't use enough of the blue, if that makes sense. They're not counteracting enough of what the natural brings to the table.
Well, those warm tones, they really fade quickly. I mean, really, when you look at someone with gray hair, they're no longer warm. They're like this gray color that's not warm. And so adding some gold to the formula can get you past the point of mud. And in my mind, young stylists, it's really important that they develop an eye for color that's not muddy. And I think it's really easy for them to fall back on muddy, because muddy will cover gray, and muddy will cover faded ends. And I've been watching the local news over here. every time this woman newscaster gets on, I look at her hair and I can kind of tell you what the
They
hairdresser is
always
trying
have
to
the
do to
worst
it.
hair color newscasters. It's rare
And
that there's pretty color on a newscaster.
I look at her hair and it's just so brassy. And I understand what the hairdresser is trying to do. But the reason it's brassy is because they're not formulating correctly for covering that brassiness. They're just throwing mud on there, and mud has warmth in it. And so, when it fades, it's going to fade warm. This is the thing with permanent color is always, always going to look warm.
Always, always.
And again, when I'm using a deposit color or a demi color, I am formulating so that I can get the least amount of contributing warmth. That is my goal. I know that is a struggle. I think, I don't know about you, Elaine, but early on, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I always thought brown was the center of the color wheel. Did you? Or was it just me?
I did. And it's not just you. And I'm so happy you brought that up too, because that's another exercise that we did during the retreat. I had those cute little artist paint palettes, and I put a drop of red, a drop of yellow, and a drop of blue. And I said, mix, do a dot on your paper of each one of these, swirl them together and tell me what you get. And they were all like, gray, 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 gray. And I was like, exactly. And that's why when we're glazing and toning and we keep going across the wheel to cancel things out, we're taking it to gray. We're not taking it to brown. So that was a huge aha moment in the retreat, because they're like, holy crap, I've been thinking this whole time that it's all bringing me back to brown, but it's really bringing me to gray. So that's something that I learned
gray
pretty recently.
Gray is not a bad thing at all. It's not bad. In fact, I learned through my mentor to always have a little tube of gray, because gray is a balanced color. And if your hair color is missing something and you're not sure what, you can squeeze a little bit of gray to take it to one side or the other, depending on what your goal is. So, there were times when I had to rely on that, because, even after all these years of doing hair is still challenging. Color is still challenging. But when you have the tools in your brain, the educational tools, you can take little tidbits of what you've learned and change how the hair color works. And
so what's an example of the tube of silver? That's interesting, because I've never heard that before. So what would be an example of a silver shade?
Well,
like I know I have one in my demi line, but in permanent, I can't think of what a silver would be.
There was a color line that I was using that had you can buy like silver or gray pigments, how you can buy individual pigments, and you can just add just a little tiny bit to your formula and it'll soften the end result. It softens it. So it's just a nice little tool to have. I can't come up with an exact scenario because it's really been a while for me, but there were times when I just needed that reassurance of being more like this result or more like that result. And so I would just plop in a little bit of silver or a little bit of gray. And what that is you're just adding a little bit of color that's already balanced. I don't know how to explain it more than that. And so if your formula is a little bit off, you can add this little bit of gray, or if it's a lighter level, silver, just to carry it over to one side of the color wheel or another. What I would recommend doing is take a formula that you make with 20 volume and let it process on white fabric and look at it. Has to be cotton, white fabric, and look at that formula. And then mix it with a little bit of gray and look at it and see what it does. and see if you like that result. I remember when I was working on a client, this isn't a gray thing, but it's about mixing a formula that you're trying to get a certain result with. So when I was switching color lines, I had a formula on this one client that she absolutely loved. And so I wanted to match it with this new color line I was using. So I took what colors I thought would work and I swatched it out on fabric, and it looked nothing like the result that I got from her original formula on fabric. So what I saw was more of a brown rather than this really coppery, fiery brown result that I wanted. So I realized that the copper of this color line that I was using had too much brown in it. So I had to use a color that was like double pigmented copper. So once I switched just that one tube and going from copper brown to a copper brown, then I got the result I wanted, because I was able to visually see how close the two formulas were, and that ended up being the formula that I used on her. So I think it's important to, really understand your color line, what exactly is in it, because face it, much of what we learned in hair color, we learned from manufacturers. We learned what they wanted us to know. And, we were like little sheep and just believing everything that we were told. And, but it was just mind-boggling. If I showed you all the color swatches I have in my phone that I took pictures of, your jaw would drop, because, I wanted to see what was really muddy. Because sometimes I would mix up a hair color that was supposed to be blue and it looked green. And I was like, oh my gosh, that meant that whatever formula I was putting that tube of color in was contributing green to the formula. And that's why I wasn't getting the result I wanted. And so these are just so important to learn doing these things. That's, part of becoming, that will make you confident in your hair color.
The mixed tones that you talked about with the silver and the gray, I learned a couple times the hard way on how much a chocolate chip size of the pure pigment additive can take over a formula. I would get all excited when I would have a blonde and they would have, either a violet or a blue mixed tone. And I would add like the tiniest little dot of it, thinking it's just going to refine it. And it would be like blue on their hairline. So you have to really be careful with how much a pure pigment versus
and I
something.
Can't say that enough.
Yeah.
If it's excuse me, if it's a color line that's a alkaline color line, a lot of alkaline color lines have these pigments that you can add to your formula. Like there's golds, there's greens, there's blues, and there's gray, and there's gray for a reason. And, again, I would just encourage every hairdresser. I mean, if you don't have white cotton fabric, do it on a paper towel. Just so that you can see, and of course you have to mix it with developer. You just have to, because that is what's required for the color to develop and for you to see it. If you just did it right out of the tube and painted it on, you wouldn't see a thing.
Right.
You would just see this whatever. But again, it would just bring amazing confidence. I remember when I first started doing hair, I worked with Redken. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've used this is the only color line I've used. I'm not going to use anything different because this one I know. Well, when I started learning about swatching out color, I could not get my hands on enough. It was so fun to try these other color lines and see what they looked like. It was like painting. It was exciting. And I was taking pictures, and okay, I'm not going to name this brand, but I had a client that had developed, a PPD allergy. What's that called? I can't remember. And so, I was using a PPD free color line in one brand and a PPD free color line in another brand. And so the one brand I was using on her hair, her doctor who found the allergy recommended the brand. So I went out and bought it for her. Well, she came back the next time and I was just like, I can't believe how much your hair is faded. This is just crazy. So I switched to another brand, and I will say that it's not Italian, from Spain. So whatever you call it. So I tried the Spanish brand of color, and I was using a level 7. So I swatched out the level 7 in the Spanish brand, and I swatched out the level 7 in the other brand. And when they were fully developed after an hour, the level 7 looked like a 9. I was mind boggled, not on the head. Okay. It didn't look like that on the head, but on the fabric, I could see the level 7 over here. And this was not really a level 7. So that was a huge learning curve for me, because not all level 7s are the same in the color lines you use. Some are darker and some are lighter. And if you're getting faded, if you're getting fading and you know you've applied properly, you need to do some detective work and find out why that happened. And honestly, I have pictures somewhere in my phone. If I can find them, I'll send it. I was just like,
that's when the book needs to come out. You need to turn all those swatch photos into a book, because the reason that we did those exercises at the retreat is I explained to the attendees that this isn't rocket science, and this isn't something that you don't know how to do. It's something that you don't wake up on a Wednesday morning and say, I'm going to buy cotton muslin fabric and I'm going to get a bunch of different tubes of color and I'm just going to sit here. Like, that was a lot of time for you to do that. And when you were doing it, you were not only were you learning how to be a better colorist, you were learning how to be a color educator. So you took the time to do that. Most people don't take the time to do that. And it's that simple with figuring out what it's going to look like before you put it on the hair and before there's a disaster. It's so simple. Then we took it to the next level and did it on the actual human hair swatches. And there was so many light bulb moments for that, with formulas that they keep reaching for and using, you know, for example, like the ABN in Redken, where when they saw it on the swatch, they're like, holy crap, that is blue. Like, they don't realize the power of the blue in that formula.
Yeah. And, you know, again, we're so quick to believe a swatch. Yeah. and I'm referring to the synthetic swatches out of the book. I mean, you know, we take the synthetic swatches and we're not supposed to show them to our clients, but we all do. And, you know, we're saying, pick one out. And, you know, I think we have to, again, really educate our client on what's realistic for their hair and their level and what's not realistic, because maybe they're going to need to foil their hair along with that hair color to get to that realistic approach. You can't just look at a swatch and pick it out and expect that that's the end result you're going to get. Swatches just are a visual guide. They're not the holy grail of what you're going to get. And that's just something that stylists have to understand.
Exactly. I see people freaking out every day in forums going, I cannot get my hands on the XYZ swatch. Who has one? I'll pay anything for it. And it's like, they think that the answer to formulation is in that swatch book, and it just doesn't work that way. And it pains me to see it all the time, over and over and over again.
I'm sorry. I'm always trying to interrupt you because I'm afraid I'm going to forget my
we're exactly the same. I'm the same way.
you know, my biggest pet peeve is going into a forum, and I don't do that anymore because otherwise I would be a lunatic at the end of the day, seriously. But my biggest pet peeve is when a hairdresser asks for a formula and we don't know the level they're searching for. We don't know what their client's percentage of gray or natural is. We don't know the texture of their hair, of the person, because when you're formulating, we have to know, okay, what is the natural level? And what is the textured of hair? And what is the desired level? And what's your hair color that you're currently using? we have to know all of this information. You can't just say, how do you get this color? Well, it just, it's, they don't know what they don't know. See, that's the problem.
Yep.
And after you've done hair for 20 years, maybe even 10, if you're lucky, you start to learn what you don't know. In other words, what I mean by learn is you're not learning what the solutions are. No, you can't come up yet. My husband's like almost ready to come upstairs. You're not, what was I saying? You are finally learning what you don't know. What I mean by that is you're finally understanding what you need to know. That's what I mean.
Yes.
Is you're understanding, I finally am understanding, I don't know this, so I need education in this. That's what I mean by you're learning what you don't know. And when a hairdresser is starting out, they don't have any experience yet. So they're just doing, they're doing everything. And good for them, because they have to make mistakes in order to learn by them. If you don't ever make any mistakes in anything, you're never going to learn. I'm so thankful for all the mistakes I've made throughout my career, and probably will continue to make when I decide to go back to work. It just depends on when and who, and so many scenarios. But this is where wisdom comes in, and all these years of being behind the chair, several years behind the chair, it softens you. And you come out of beauty school and you think you can kick ass because you know it all. Well, you know nothing. But then after a few years, you're really beginning to realize you don't know everything the way you thought you did. And that's where education, in fact, I think education is more beneficial in an experienced stylist's life than an inexperienced stylist's life.
I agree.
Because those inexperienced ones, they are finally, they're just not open enough. They're still trying to prove themselves.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the perfect way to end this second episode that we've been blessed to have together, because you and I could go on for another hour just on gray and just on education. So I'm so happy to have you back in this conversation. I know it's been a while. I'm so excited for people to listen to this second episode that we did together, because
yes.
We really do have the wisdom of experience. And it's like when your grandma was trying to tell you all those great stories and you were younger and you didn't want to hear it. Now you would pay $1 million to have grandma tell you a story, because you realized that there was a lot of wisdom in that. So we're just going to keep plugging along and keep offering the information, and hope that the younger ears will take it in and save themselves some heartache and headache. So it's always a pleasure, Jennifer. Say hello to your handsome husband, and I will definitely be staying in touch. I'm blessed to call you my friend.
Thank you.
And I love spending time with you, even if it's in a computer screen.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was an honor to be here, and I hope more people find out about you, because they need to know what you have to offer.
Oh, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We will see you on the next one.